Welcome back to the Tipsy Theology podcast. Why did I say it that way? Because it's early in the morning. It's an early morning here, but I've got two people to make it a little bit of a warmer morning. So we've got our fan favorite, Dustin. Dustin, it's great to have you back.
I've been on one episode.
You've quickly become a favorite.
I love it.
I think I have more people be like, who's this Dustin guy? Can he be on all the time now?
Oh,
I'm like, well, that's what I would love.
I love that.
That's awesome.
Glad to be here, man.
And then we have our new friend today, Michael McPadden, joining us, who is the author of Genesis to Revelation. It's this beefcake of a book right here that I have. I think it's like 6,000 pages, pretty close.
Somewhere around that. Or that might be the Bible, and this is the condensed version, huh?
That's so true. Well, what I love when we started talking, Mike, you had no problem, very, very, very matter-of-factly say, yeah, so everything that we've taught or understood and learned about the Bible is wrong. And I was like, I need to talk to this guy.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. This is great to be here. It's interesting. So, during this whole process, when I was out scouring the internet to see who's out there and what they're saying, I find it amazing the number of devout Christians who have completely walked away from the faith because they think what they have been taught or learned in the church is Christianity. Then they go, well, this doesn't work. This doesn't make sense to me. And so now a lot of them are preachers. Like there was a guy who has an internet channel, a YouTube channel, fairly popular. He was for 20 years, he was an evangelical preacher and just said, this is all wrong. And I'm walking away from my Christian faith. And my attitude was, yes, what they teach is wrong in many accounts, but you have to go to church to at least be introduced to the gospel. And then you have to learn it for yourself. If you're not reading the Bible and trying to discern what it says for yourself, you're not trying. And I feel bad for these guys because it's like the Bible's not wrong. The New Testament is not wrong. What's wrong is man's interpretation of it. And so we can get into that later, but let me go over a quick synopsis of how I interpret the Bible. And then the questions will be a lot of questions, I'm sure. So,
of course.
So let's start. We'll start in Genesis. The three most important chapters in Genesis, chapters 1, 2, and 3. Chapter 1 gives us some information. One, it tells us God's actual name and how God refers to himself, and that is I am and I become. And so that initially opens up the idea that we have a dualistic God. Okay, he is the God of I am, and he's the God of I become. You don't see that name really turn up too much in the rest of the Bible, except in some very kind of obscure references. So, for example, in Exodus, that's the exact name that God gives to Moses at the burning bush. Moses is a great character because he's like, God, you got the wrong guy. I'm not interested. I'm a goat herder out here in Midian. And God says, yeah, well, you're going to do this anyway. So he says, all right. So he tries to trick God. He says, all right, well, if I go to the sons of Israel, remember, he's not familiar with them at all. He says, if I go to the sons of Israel and I tell them that I talk to you, what should I tell them your name is? So Moses has got him on the ropes, right? And God goes, you tell the sons of Israel that I am and I become has sent me to you. So we can get into that later if you want. I won't get too deep in it. Jesus refers to when you pray to the God in the unseen, and your Father who sees will answer your prayer. So you've got the unseen and the seen, I am and I become. Paul says that Christ, the Lord, is the image or the creation. In Revelation, it's more direct. He says in Revelation, 1, 4 through 8, the angel that's speaking to John says, I am who was and who will be. So when you say was, that's past in time, space-time. And when you say will be, it's time and space-time. But when you say I am, it's in the eternal present moment, the narrow gate. And so you have the God of I am and the God of I become referenced in Revelation. What Genesis chapter 1 does for us as a second thing, besides talking about God's name, it also tells us how God creates our ever-present reality. And what's interesting, and we can get into this later too, it's a little deep, but not too deep. It's exactly how quantum physicists describe our reality being created now. And it's all done in 2 verses of Genesis. It's really pretty fascinating. Then we go to Genesis chapters 2 and 3. So Genesis 1 is about the creation of reality and our God. Genesis 2 and 3 is about us. It's a schematic of the human psyche. And there's 2 sides. The first, Genesis chapter 2, tells us what the perfect man looks like. He has Yahweh Elohim as God, or the consciousness of I am, within us. And then you have the man symbolically representing the reality that we experience every day. And the woman is symbolically representative of human self-awareness, which eventually becomes our belief system and our ego, or the tree of knowledge. And this is where we all fall. So in the end of Genesis chapter 2, you have the picture of the perfect man, Yahweh Elohim, the man, and the non-speaking virginal woman. Then we go to Genesis chapter 3, and we go down there, and it explains how man fell from grace, if you want, leaving the tree of life and moving into the tree of knowledge, which is the woman, ego, and the human belief system. And so at the end of chapter 3, we see the completely broken man leaving the garden. That's all of us today, living our lives as egoic human beings, separate from God. So that's Genesis in a nutshell. So now we have a picture of where we were, what went wrong, and why we need a Savior. So we jump over the whole of the Old Testament and we go to the New Testament. So the New Testament gives us an outline for what's going to happen in our lives as we pick up the cross and follow Christ. So the way I look at it is, when you hear about the Gospel of Mark, Luke, what you're really reading is the gospel of Christ according to Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. And so I look at the letters that Paul wrote as the gospel of Christ according to Paul. Now, obviously, that's not the way they look at it. That's the way I look at it. So in the gospel of Christ, you have 4 main pillars. And you have to understand these pillars. You don't have to believe in them, but you have to understand Jesus and Paul firmly believed in these 4 pillars. And they are predestination, the day of the Lord, the kingdom of the heavens, and resurrection. Jesus talked about resurrection and the kingdom of the heavens. He's mentioned it over 100 times just in the gospel. Jesus focused more on the spirituality of Christianity, and Paul focused more on the physicality. So once again, you have this dualistic reference of Paul and Jesus. And so Paul focused on predestination and the day of the Lord. So these are physical things that happen to us. Well, the day of the Lord is a spiritual thing. But Paul was talking about how to live your life as a Christian, things that are, if you're doing things in a certain manner, you're doing it wrong, and how to move towards a more spiritual life to achieve the day of the Lord, the kingdom of the heavens, and then finally resurrection. Then we get to Revelation. Revelation is a very intense and detailed hero's journey, which is, I have a whole chapter in my book about the hero's journey. And basically, the hero's journey is an outline of the journey of the human soul from the beginning to the very end. That's how I see the Bible.
Thanks for giving us that summary.
Yeah.
That's tons of questions up front for sure.
Yeah.
That it raises. And for me, it's like, there's so many different levels to it that build off of one another.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, from the starting point, if the starting point is different, everything else changes too, because it has to.
Yeah, yeah. If you don't understand where you've been and where you're coming from, it's kind of hard to understand why you need a savior to begin with,
It's so
right?
true.
And we don't teach Genesis in this manner, which is odd. It's like if you understand how to read Genesis chapter 2 and 3, you already have a good idea of why life is the way it is for you right now and where the direction of it is going to go because of predestination, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's funny to say because right off the bat, and I'm sure this doesn't come as a surprise to you, and in very Tipsy Theology fashion, this is what we're all based on. Is it's like, yeah, there's definitely things that it's like, well, I don't. That's not how I read it. That's not what, like, I don't agree. Which that should not come as a shock for you to hear that.
Everything I say about the Bible is counter what's being taught in the modern church. So yes, I am an official heretic. They would have burned me at the stake as soon as I tried to get my book out years ago. So yeah, I'm used to that.
So I'll put my rock down for a second.
Thank you.
Let me put my torch out real quick.
Yeah.
I won't be needing this
What's
right
that pile
now.
of firewood for?
But I think it's important, and I think it's fun to let's as fellow believers, as truth seekers, as whatever label we want to give ourselves, let's explore ideas and let's talk about them because I think that's fun. And I think it's really important to challenge positions and challenge ideas and have a show that we can have a conversation about it without burning each other at the stake.
Yeah.
Oh, good. That's good for me.
Yeah, right. Probably me too. I talk way too much.
I don't talk enough, so I'm just here to listen. You know?
You're just the guy like, yeah, I guess someone's getting burned today. Go check that out.
I don't know what happened. They just both caught on fire. There was rocks, all kinds of stuff.
Like, I just happened.
It just happened so fast.
Well, before we really dive into it all the way, I also want to ask, what are we drinking today?
I have a very strong cup of French roast coffee. My wife calls it Turkish coffee.
Oh, that's good.
Oh,
That's
man.
how you know it's strong.
That's how you know it's strong.
And I actually have a cup of drip coffee here myself in my Waffle House mug.
Perfect.
It's Tim Hortons, so that tells you anything.
I went the English route. I have some Earl Grey tea.
Ooh.
Oh, nice.
I don't have any
Nice.
coffee in my whole house apparently. So
Do your
That's
best.
as close as you can get next to it.
Yeah. I've just got a plain old Yeti cup too. So
That's a nice
Bougie,
color,
yeah.
though.
yeah, right.
It
It'll
complements
stay
your
hot
complexion.
for the next 4 hours. So
Yeah, I think mine's already cold. But yeah, so I kind of teased it earlier, but we're here at 5 a.m. to make sure we can all have time to talk and record before our lives move on for the
full
day.
work for all of us.
Except for Mike, he is a proud enjoyer of retirement.
Oh,
Yeah.
bless you.
Yeah.
I know you did it. You made it.
I survived.
And I do want to ask as well, if you're comfortable sharing, what are your views on alcohol? Because I know that is a big, somewhat taboo topic for a lot of Christians. So I'm curious, outside of your other non-orthodox beliefs.
So this is interesting. Alcohol's interesting. So when I was younger, I loved alcohol. I was never like someone that would drink too much. I would drink to a certain level of inebriety, and then I would stay there by having a beer an hour or something along those lines. I love going into bars and having an IPA and dinner and talking with people. And I enjoyed the alcohol. It's odd if you look, if you go to a gathering of a lot of different people of different ages, a lot of older people don't drink that much. And I noticed that growing up, and I never questioned it really. I found that after I turned 60, alcohol just didn't have the same effect on me as it did when I was younger. It made me just slower. It made me sleepy. And as it turns out, I developed an allergy to it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's weird. So you drink alcohol in it, and it can destroy muscle tissue. And so last summer, my daughter came over. We were having a nice dinner. I had a couple glasses of wine, and like, I like to work out and stay in shape. I lost about 15 pounds of muscle.
No way.
My rotator cuffs just completely got shot, blown out. I couldn't work out for a couple of weeks. It was terrible. And I'm thinking,
Whoa.
well, I guess God's trying to tell me something. It's time to grow up, Mike, and move on. So if you can drink alcohol and you enjoy it and you don't over imbibe, I say knock yourself out. I think I'm a little jealous. Because, when I was younger, it was really I liked it, but I just can't drink it now. It's totally not, I just can't. So that's my view.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that about the allergy side.
The thing is that it when you get older, there's a lot of physiological changes you go through that lead you towards spirituality. If you have older people in your life, you might find them sitting on the porch in a rocking chair, just staring out into nature. And you go, wow, it must be terrible to be that old. It's like, no, that's a very spiritual thing they're doing. They're just in a state of mindless or brainless prayer. They're just looking at nature and taking in what God is giving them. And it's kind of a beautiful thing. When you get towards the end of your life, you're about to enter the resurrection, the most spiritual experience you can have in this existence as human beings. And so God, I believe, is preparing us to do that as we get older. Just certain things happen. And that's my belief. Now, I don't have any science to back this up. I'm just an observer of nature and looking out there going, this seems to be what's happening. I don't know.
I do that at work every day. So.
Yeah.
And now you have a good excuse to be like, no, it's for my religion.
Yeah. I work for my family business. My dad comes up. No, it's a spiritual thing, Dad.
It's spiritual. You wouldn't get it.
I'm getting ready for resurrection.
Can I take time off of work for that? Do I get?
It's like, you're fired with torches.
With torches? No, not the torches. Which living in Florida, that's every day feels like you're standing in a torch.
Right? Yeah. No doubt. Walk outside and it's torched outside.
Yeah.
Where are y'all from in Florida?
We're in Central Florida.
Yep.
Okay, like Orlando area, middle.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I love Florida. I lived in Florida for 6 years. I was in the Navy. And we lived in Jacksonville and Pensacola. And I loved it. The beach and the warm weather. It was awesome.
And Pensacola beaches are beautiful.
They're crazy. So I grew up on Virginia beaches. This is totally off the subject of what we're supposed to be talking about. But the beaches have a lot of brown sand. And so just to get from the sand dunes to the water, you've got to walk across this super hot sand, right? Because the sun bakes it. In Pensacola, the sand is pure white. So it reflects all the heat. You can walk across. So that was the strangest thing to me. I was like, how come this sand's not burning my feet?
And it squeaks too, which is crazy.
That's right. It does. I remember that too.
Like a dry snow.
Yeah. Actually, you guys got quite a bit of snow recently, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. One of the things I do to stay young is to snowboard. And so we have a ski resort close by, and it was the best season they've ever had with snow and cold weather so they could make the snow. And it was a lot of fun because my daughter lives here now, and her kids are 10, 12, and 14. So I was able to go snowboarding with them.
That's cool.
It's just such a great time. It was really cool.
That's grandpa goals right there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's good retirement.
You have one retirement. You're doing it right.
That's right.
Also, before we move on, thank you for your service. You said you were in the Navy.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I did a total of 11 years. Yeah.
Wow.
It was great.
My grandfather.
That's so cool.
That's cool.
Yeah. He's probably younger than me.
He's up there. He's up there. He's out in Kansas now, just like riding tractors around and fishing and stuff. So
that's what I do, man. I was in the Navy. I flew airplanes, and then I became an international airline pilot. And flew for a total of about 40 years. and all I did was travel. My life was traveling, going all over.
A dream.
And now I'm retired. I go anywhere. Like they had to drag me out of my house to go to Atlanta for the week I told you about, Paul. So I don't travel.
Like I've done it. I'm good.
Yeah, been there. I've seen everything I want to see. I'm good.
That's awesome. That's so awesome, though.
And it's amazing that you've gone from like, all right, so like naval flying and then international flying, and now like I'm just gonna write books and talk about theology, and like that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, as a predestinationist, you just go along the flow of the river. It's like, I'm writing a book now, I guess. This is what we're doing today. But honey, you're not a writer. Tell me about it.
I am now.
I am now, apparently.
That's fun.
Well, for someone who's not a writer, you wrote a lot.
Oh my gosh. You can't believe how much I cut out.
Oh
Oh
man.
my gosh.
Yeah, actually, I'm curious on a more of like an admin side question. How was that for you? So this being your first book, correct?
Yes.
And on a heavy topic as well. How did that start? Was it just like, let me just put a jumble of words down and then try to find some order in them?
I've always I love reading the scripture. It's fun because it's almost always different from what they teach, right? So I go, well, that's not what they said it said. And I just like the investigation of looking at the Greek words or the Hebrew words and parsing what they really mean and putting the thoughts together. And one day I just started writing my ideas down. I said, am I writing a book? Is that what's going on here? It's very interesting. Most of the stuff that I wrote, I was 100% sure of. And to be honest, a lot of stuff I wrote, I said, I think this is what it means. I could be wrong. You gotta put stuff down, right? So
Yeah.
That's so
That's where
true.
it starts. Yeah.
I love the humility of it too, because that's the truth. There are some people like, this is 100% it, and it means nothing else. We're like, well, hold on.
Yeah. I'm like, that's your opinion.
yeah.
Well, that's what I find interesting. Like even as we're jumping into it, like Genesis 1:1. It's so funny. I've told this I've said this a lot on the podcast as well. Is like I could probably spend the rest of my life just in the first 3 verses of Genesis and have too much to talk about.
Yeah.
It's like there's so much in there, but I think more than that is even the way it's translated or the way it's interpreted isn't fully agreed upon. I mean, you bring it up. I'll let you talk about it. Is Genesis 1:1 in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth? Is that just what it is?
Well, so
translation wise.
So we could talk for half an hour on this particular line.
So true.
the way it starts off in Hebrew, let me see, Bereshit bara Elohim. So Bereshit is the word begin.
Yeah.
There's no the. So you would say, so the makes it a particular beginning, but just to say begin is what they call a construct, a prepositional construct. So the best way to translate it is to give it a temporal element, but not say in the beginning of something. So you would say when God began to create the heavens and the earth had become void. So that makes a lot more sense. It's a transitional statement into what I'm about to tell you next. The earth had become void and formless, right? So that makes a lot more sense. And it's a better translation, I think. Some Bibles actually do translate it that way. But it's also, I also go back to the Sumerian texts of creation, and that's how they begin theirs, saying it when God began. Well, they say on high. So when on high began. So I said, that's probably a better translation. So that's how I put it in my book.
That's interesting. Even like how we got to where we traditionally in English Bibles translate it. I find it interesting because, and correct me if I have this part wrong, like vowels didn't exist for the longest time in the Hebrew language. But I think that's an important thing for us to look at. On one hand, first is like the Bible wasn't written in English, so we can't expect to put English understanding and meaning into it because that's not the original language.
Yeah.
So for the longest time, I think it wasn't until like early to late AD where this idea of vowels and a lot of punctuation was really added into the text.
Right.
And so we have, you mentioned Bereshit, and so that is the, gives the when versus ba, which is the. And so we take the Bereshit interpretation and say, in the beginning. Whereas I think in even in the Hebrew Bible, it actually is Bereshit, which would be when God began.
Right. So it's not that big a point. The most controversial thing that I say in Genesis chapter 1 is that it's not let there be, but I am light and I become light. I am and I become.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I'd like to spend some time on that if we could.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting with that. I'll let you lay out your I guess your understanding of that and how you got there, because it's one that for me I was thinking about this a lot yesterday as well. Leading up to this conversation is okay. Like there's a lot of clever. It feels like a lot of clever wordplay to get there.
So when you say one of the way that they express God's name is I am and I become in the in Genesis 1 is through the use of the word bara Elohim. So Elohim, everybody knows or should know at this point that Elohim is a plural version of the word El.
Yeah.
So it's really, in English, it would be gods with the S. But bara, which is to create, is singular masculine. So basically in Hebrew, the verb to create has a masculine component to it, which points to a singular masculine entity doing the creating, Elohim. So that's why we say when God began to create, because it's a singular masculine on the create, and it's plural masculine. So the plural references I become as the plural creation, and the singular bara references the singular God of I am. So when you go down to verse 3, it's the same thing. The word Yehai means to exist. And so when it says to exist, there's a singular masculine component to it. So basically, somebody is existing as light or will exist as light. Some masculine singular entity. And the only one in this verse is Elohim. So Elohim said, I am light and I become light. I am and I become. So that's how I interpret it. It makes more sense too. You got to remember, so Moses has to go to the sons of Israel and say, hey, I talked to God. And they're like, what's his name? Because only the sons of Israel with Genesis understood God as I am and I become. You don't find this anywhere else in the old world, except in the books that the sons of Israel had. And as soon as Moses said that, they went, he's our guy. He clearly understands our text, having never read them before. So he's getting this information somewhere else from the source. That's how I figured it out, to be perfectly honest, because I was reading it going, what did God say to Moses at the burning bush? Because he gave him his name. And I went and I did this whole thing on chapter 3. It's like a legal brief, so it's very boring, but it's a proof that God's name is I am and I become.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what's interesting about that too, because in the first half of that, when he says, which in the Hebrew is the Ehya, Asher, correct?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, good.
And my pronunciation is a whole other thing. But
yeah, I'm not a Hebrew speaker either, so I say Ehya, Asher, Ehya is what I say. So it's just what you said.
I won't even attempt it.
We're all non-ancient, non-Jews here. So.
That's right.
Right, I'm from Florida, you know.
We do what we can do.
That's right.
We all can't even pronounce our county name the same way. Is it Polk? Is it Polk? Is it?
It's actually Ashtabula. Ashtabula County.
That's a good callback. I like
the last couple episodes.
So I think it's interesting with that, because those are, and you bring it out that they are verbs. Is a verb form, which I can't remember the root of it off the top of my head right now.
Yeah means to exist. It's the same root from Yehai from Genesis 1.
Yes, that's right. And it's interesting because it's like, all right, so that's not really a name, but that's what he calls himself. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way it works is you have two words that are exactly the same, a yeah, starting and ending, and then you have what they call a relational connector, asser. Asser is in the middle of the sentence because you have to know that these two words are connected. So a relational connector would be something, the limb fell from that tree. So you have to know what limb you're talking about. So you wouldn't need a relational connector if the first yeah were the same as the second yeah. So they're connected because they're different. They're verbs. And then in English, we don't connect similar verbs with, that, they, them, whatever. We connect it with, conjugates? Anyway, we connect it with words like and. So you can have either I become and I am, or I am and I become. I am that I am has no meaning. It's completely ridiculous. So anyway, so it's called a relational connector, and in English it only sounds right when you connect it with the word and. So if the first word means I am, then the second word has to be different, and the only other different word it can be is to be become. So I am means I exist in the moment, and become means I'm changing over time and space. And so that's why it's I am and I become, as opposed to I am and I am, or I am that I am.
Yeah, and to ask the silly question, is it fair for us to kind of place our syntax onto ancient Hebrew?
Yeah, because the concepts are the same. We have to have it in our head as a concept. So in chapter 1, I talk about how the mind and the brain connect, and through the language center. It's very deep, but it explains a lot of things about how everything works with us. And so we all have a concept, and then we have to download the concept into the brain, the language center, and create words. There's always going to be a problem with that. Words don't always define the concepts we're trying to get out, but we do the best we can. So, yeah, like I said, I am that I am doesn't make any sense. And you should just say I am, because it's not a proper relational connector in English. If you spoke Hebrew and understood Hebrew, you would understand that asser connects ayah 1 and ayah 2 to each other. And in your mind, it may not be the word and, but it would be something similar to and, where you would understand that these words are connected and different. That's a fundamental understanding that you should take away from it, I think.
So is it, because that's a different understanding of that connector, a share there, so is that something that we see in other parts of Scripture being used as well? That connector punctuation.
Yeah, but okay. So when you see these things written in Scripture, sometimes they have symbolic content, and sometimes they don't. In other words, the concept of bara Elohim, where you have a singular verb and a plural word for God, you see that a lot in the Old Testament. But the symbolic content is missing. They just did it to mimic Genesis without understanding the symbolic content, why we are doing this. So they continue to carry it through. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah,
okay.
I think so.
Dude, we just had a conversation last night about that exact comment, did we not?
we did.
It's a beautiful thing. You don't even realize. It's so good.
I was telling Dustin, I think it's funny because there's times where people ask me a question and I'll go on a tangent, as I often do. And I'll start answering something and forget what their question was. And then knowing at the end I didn't actually answer their question, like, does that answer your question?
Yeah, whatever. I don't even remember what the question was.
And so we have to be like, no, tell me the question again, but in a sneaky way.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, can I hear that one more time? I think I lost the plot.
That's actually my biggest problem too.
Yeah.
So I try to stay focused with a little short answers so I don't lose it.
No, that's great. I haven't learned that skill yet.
Me either.
I'm like, if you want short answers, you're in the wrong place. I only know long
Yeah.
answers.
My problem is just like forgetting what I'm talking about mid conversation. That's mine.
It's funny. There's something I'm self-diagnosed ADHD over here. So not official, but I'm pretty sure.
Oh, I understand that.
And it's funny. It's like I feel like my brain just makes random non sequitur connections, which is like there's no reason for those two things to be connected in my brain, but I do connect them for some reason.
Yeah.
And that's when my tangents start to make no sense, but I understand them perfectly.
Yeah, right.
You know, well, to that point that you're making, when you're reading the Bible, you have to have the ability to connect dots.
Absolutely.
You just can't start anywhere and understand what you're reading without the context. So you read the whole Bible through and you remember certain parts of it, then you read it through again, and then your brain will start to make the connections, how one connects to the other. Like I was talking about how Jesus referenced God as I am and I become, and Paul referenced God. Had I not had that in the back of my mind, I wouldn't have been able to connect those dots. I would have just read over it, right? There's an interesting quote that I found the other day. I made those videos I told you about, and that was kind of an interesting experience. But one of the things I found that may be my new favorite quote from Paul, and it's almost like a side note, like you never hear anyone talk about it. But at the end of one of his paragraphs, and I don't know what letter right offhand, but he says, "For many are the promises of God, and in him are found the yes and the amen." And he ends it by saying, "God's glory through us." It's these things we're going to experience it within our being, and it's through us that the glory of God is going to be experienced. That's phenomenal to me because it's God. I mean, the concept of God is beyond our understanding. And I'm not trying to parrot what I heard somewhere. It literally is. God is, the concept of God, the information, the understanding is so out there, it's so large that when this glory happens, it's going to be possibly overwhelming, which I'm good with. I'm good with.
Yeah, I can handle that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important thing to look at when we look at the how powerful God is, and that in relation to everything that He created. I think even when I think it's important when you talk about the words that are in the Bible, and it's like, yeah, I think it's important when we connect those dots, because if we're going to believe that every word in Scripture is inspired by God, well, then it's like, well, let's prove it by paying attention to the words that He has in there. Let's not just skip the ones we don't like or we don't quite get. Like, let's actually pay attention to what's happening here.
If you want to, here's how I look at it. Here's how I look at the immensity of God. It's kind of easy to understand, I think. So when we come here, we are deliberately put into the darkness. Like, we don't know anything. Like, I barely could tell you what I did yesterday. And and I'm 70 now, right? So I've got this long line of a life that I've lived, and I can't tell you 99% of the moments of my life that I experienced. I don't know anything about your life either. You know what I mean? It's like, and you have this incredible amount of information for the lives you've lived. I don't know anything about it. So let's imagine our life as stepping stones, right? We go from one stepping stone to the next as we live the moments of our lives. Every time we step on a stone, it lights up. The one behind us goes dark because we're not experiencing it in real time. God is. God has to keep all the stepping stones lit. That's what I am is. It's information for each of those stepping stones. Imagine the complexity of each moment of our lives. I'm looking around this room I'm in, and everything I look at is undergirded by an incredible amount of information, right? That's true for all of us. So we go through these stepping stones of life. People who have near-death experiences always talk about having their entire life review. Their whole life lights up in front of them. So all their stepping stones light up at one time, and they see it all at once. That's a spiritual experience. The human brain could never comprehend that. When we die, we go into the resurrection. all of our lights, all the stepping stones of our life light up. All that information is available to us. But then as we continue through the resurrection, all the lights of the people around us start to light up. Think about this. So the Bible talks about, in Genesis chapter 1, day 6, God says, let the earth bring forth the living soul. The living soul is every animal that has consciousness, all the mammals, all the bugs, everything that moves and breathes, technically, is a living soul with a conscious understanding of its existence, right? All those souls have information that God is holding on to. That's trillions and trillions and trillions of souls on the earth right now. And there's trillions and trillions that were on the earth a year ago and 1,000 years ago. That's just planet Earth. This is the information that we're going to have to move through as we enter and ascend through the resurrection.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. That's my point, is that's the glory of God that we will experience as we go through the resurrection. And we all go through it together.
Yeah.
We all enter the resurrection exactly at the same time. These are hard concepts for people to get.
I think you touched based on Paul sent me a video of yours, and you touched base a little bit how the soul and the spirit separate at the resurrection, and then the soul is no more. Is that correct?
No. So we're dualistic creatures. Our human experience is about having a physical component, our bodies and the world around us, and a spiritual component, the I am that exists within us, our consciousness. So when we die, what happens is we enter the resurrection while we are still alive as human beings. The entire resurrection process happens in the last maybe couple milliseconds of our life. But it lasts for 1,000 years. It's a time dilation that we go through that is occurring while we're still alive, because once the body's dead, we are no longer a soul. A soul has to have both components to it, the dust of the earth and the breath of life. So the resurrection has to occur. When Jesus said that we would be in paradise this day, he used a unit of time. He didn't say forever. Paul says when we resurrect, we will join with the Lord and be with him for all time, which is interesting because he could have said forever, but he didn't. He said for all time. And as long as we're alive, as long as we have a physical body that exists within space and time, we will have time. So the only way this works is through a time dilation process. I explained it at the end of the book, and basically what happens is as we're leaving our human body, as it's dying, the first thing that goes is human ego, because that's worthless subroutine of code that the brain puts together for us. That gets shut down. We lose all sense of human self-awareness and the human ego. And then as that happens, we start to become less and less attached to this world and time. So when you hear about the end of the world, you hear about people going through this process, they always describe it as the sun turns black, the moon falls from the sky, the sky rolls up like a scroll. The physical world is being destroyed around us. And as it happens, we become less and less attached to time and more attached to the eternal moment of God. So we're going from a place where a moment of existence equals a moment in time to a place where a moment of existence equals always. And if you see that happening, it's basically a time dilation that we're experiencing. That's why the resurrection lasts for 1,000 years and can only happen while we are still alive. If you think about it, what makes us human, our consciousness is exactly the same. We all have one consciousness, one spirit. But what makes me different from you is my physical body and my experiences and the things I've seen in my life. And the growth process that I've gone through, which is so different from what you guys have experienced, right? And so what would be the point of having another body, another something resurrect? It's not the same. I have to be the one that resurrects. or it's not a resurrection. So this is all happening while we're still alive. And when you read the words of the New Testament, Jesus says that, Paul says that, and Revelation is very clear about the process that's going on. We all walk into the holy city together as the brothers in Christ.
So what do you do with Jesus when we see that resurrection of his body, and it says he has a why can't I think of the word right now? A glorified body, I think is the word that's given.
Paul talks about we will have glorified bodies. There's a spiritual body, a physical body. You got to remember, it's all symbolism. And it's hard to determine the symbolism that Paul's using sometimes because he just pulls words out. He wasn't writing to us. He was writing to the people who he had spent years with at times, explaining these things and using. Here's the thing about spirituality. You cannot talk about spirituality without using symbolism. We don't have words that describe the spiritual world. There's God, love. That's pretty much it, right? So what we do is we take words from the real world and apply them to a world that we don't really talk about. So there's water, we have fire, we have spiritual water, we have spiritual fire. All these things from the real world we use to describe things in the spirit world.
Yeah.
And so Paul uses, I can't think of all the words. One of them is archon. One of them is kuriotes. He uses all these different symbolism, and you have to kind of reverse engineer what he's trying to say in order to make those words. So in my book, I try and explain what I think those words mean, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Like my translation of Genesis, I'm pretty 100% sure on. I really feel like I got that right. When I talk about Paul, there's no basis for the spiritual words he uses outside of the common context, like water. Water's always spirit, right? Water always means spirit. Fire is the pain and suffering that we go through as we remove our consciousness from our ego and our belief system. That's pretty simple. But when he starts talking about the archons and the powers and the authorities, it's hard to say what he means. So I just kind of guess in a way, and we can, you can disagree, and that's fine because I'm not 100% sure, to be perfectly honest. I got to be honest about that, right?
Everything's opinion.
Yeah, that's kind of opinion. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I think that is a really important, profound thought as far as how are we explaining things. A good friend of the show, Stephen, and I have talked about this.
Shout out to Stephen.
Woo! Miss you, Stephen. We were trying to get him here today too.
Yeah, he was supposed to be here.
He's like, 5 a.m. I can't, guys. I just can't do it.
Dude, his text cracked me up. I can't. 5 a.m. I just can't.
I love how it was not like, hey guys, I can't be there. It's just like 5 a.m. I can't. I just can't.
We're not that good of friends, Paul.
But one of the things that we were talking about is that idea of like language. And it's like, well, what is language? Language is a boundary that we create on the world that we experience, or our thoughts that we have, because those things are intangible. And so how do we describe something that has no form? And so when we talk about a concept like God or love or hate or whatever it may be, it's like, that's not something you can really like hold on to. I can't hold it like I can this cup. So how am I going to describe it? And I think we see that a lot, whereas they use words like mountain to refer to nations, or they use sun, moon, and stars, or the heavens to refer to divine beings. And it's like, well, why do they use those? It's like, well, because that's the concept, the symbol that they're using to explain these things that we don't really fully get.
Right. And so there are no words to describe those. We don't have words for the spiritual world. And so because of that, we end up creating words from the real world and then transposing them. So this is where a lot of miscommunication comes in the New Testament. For example, we say spiritual fire. Well, all of a sudden now we're all burning in hell with real physical fire, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a minute, can we back up a little bit? So like in Revelation, they talk about the lake of fire. And when you read it, you realize that what goes into the lake of fire is all the programming code up here. The beast, the false prophet, Satan, Diabolus. These are all things in our brain. These are things that plague us throughout our lives. And then they go in because that's what's being destroyed in the resurrection as we rise up through the lake of fire. That, they say that, who gets put into the lake of fire? And Revelation says that part of us which needs purification is what's in the lake of fire. That part of us that does not need purification, that doesn't go in. And so they're very specific about how this whole process works. Right now, all three of us are in the lake of fire because we're being purified in various aspects of our lives, right?
Is that why it's so hot in Florida?
That's a physical fire.
That's a bad joke. Sorry for interrupting. Continue.
No. That's great. So this is where a lot of the miscommunication of the New Testament comes in, is taking spiritual concepts that use physical words to describe fire, water, air, earth, and misunderstanding them as physical things when in fact they are not. Every story that's told about the spiritual world is a symbolic story. All of Jesus's parables were about the spiritual world, but they're told in symbolic format. They're allegories. Same with the books of the Old Testament. So are you guys familiar with the hero's journey?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll let you, do you mind giving like a quick for people that aren't familiar? Yeah.
So it's pretty fascinating. So Joseph Campbell was a professor of comparative religions back in the day. He wrote a book in 1947 called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. After reading hundreds and hundreds of these myths from around the world, he said they're all telling the same story. This is a story about a hero who reluctantly takes on a challenge, goes into another world, fights various monsters, beings, things, and comes home a hero. Revelation is the exact same story, only instead of being the hero that comes home, we are the glory and the honor of the nations, or the glory and the honor of our people. So the hero's journey is in fact the journey of the human soul. So let me give you an example out of the Bible that I like. Now, most hero's journeys begin, so many things to say. The one that we use in our life, and Paul used, was the story of Exodus. Okay, so we leave childhood and we enter into an egoic life of pain and suffering. That's where we are now. At some point, you get the call to go on the adventure, which is beginning the journey, the hero's journey. In Exodus, we start off in Egypt. We are enslaved to the human ego and the programming in our brain. Then the angel of death comes over our house. We have the blood of the lamb, the slain lamb, which represents the early kingdom of Christ in our life when we were children. Children are perfect. Jesus said they exist within the kingdom of heaven already. So the slain lamb, blood on the doorpost, the angel of death flies over us. We prepare for the journey. We leave and we pass through the Red Sea. That's baptism. We enter into the wilderness. Now, this is the interesting thing. A lot of people don't understand that they spent 40 years in the wilderness because no one who was born a slave in Egypt would be able to enter into the promised land. Our slave mind, which is because we're enslaved to the human ego, will never enter into the resurrection or the day of the Lord or the kingdom of the heavens. We have to completely get rid of the slave mind. And that's the journey in the wilderness. That's what's happening to all of us right now. We're in the wilderness and we're slowly being, the slave mind is slowly being burned out of us as a new mind of freedom comes into us. Once we're ready, we cross the threshold back into the promised land, the holy city, or back into what Joseph Campbell calls the ordinary world to share the gift of our journey with our people. So most of these journeys begin at the point where we're already at the deepest part of our descent into the heart of the earth, the darkness. And then the hero's journey is typically the climb out. So let's go back to the Old Testament, the story of Job. So Job starts out.
One of my favorites.
He's rich. What's that?
So one of my favorite books of all time.
So, well, it's a hero's journey of sort, but Job is the entire story with the beginning. When you see Job in the beginning, he's rich. He has 10 sons, or he has 10 children. He has lands. He has cattle. He's a very wealthy man. And then through the workings of Satan, these things are all taken away. Well, Satan represents the egoic mind, the belief system, the pain and suffering we go through as egoic beings. So Job slowly descends into a state where he doesn't have anything. He's penniless. He's covered with sores. He never curses God, but he bitches a little bit about this sucks. What did I ever do? Right now, that's I don't know about you, but I have found myself plenty of times in life says, "What the hell? I mean, you kidding me?"
Yeah,
That's a self-confession. But anyway, so Job.
No, I love that because it's like, the psalmist does say it rains on the just, the unjust, but sometimes I feel like it rains a little bit more on me.
Is it possible?
Yeah.
So anyway, so the beginning of the story of Job, that's childhood. Children are in the kingdom of the heavens. Jesus said, "Do not hinder the little children to come unto me, for truly theirs is the kingdom of God." In other words, they're in it. The word is estin. And estin means right now in the present moment, these children are existing within the kingdom of the heavens. When we come of age, we develop an ego, and we leave the kingdom of the heaven, and we enter to the tree of knowledge. That's where Job finds himself festering boils in a terrible way. And finally, God shows up in this massive spiritual experience that Job is having. And he says, he says, "Brace yourself like a man." That's my favorite line in the whole book. Oh God, here we go, man. Brace yourself. And then he starts to explain himself to Job. He starts to show him his glory and his majesty. Job has this, that's the day of the Lord that Job is experiencing. And he says, "Yet in my flesh, I will see God." And he did. And then you have Job entering into this new life with new children, new lands. In other words, he re-enters the kingdom of the heavens as a man in his body at the end of the story. So that's the journey of the human soul. We start off perfect, the alpha. Then we go into the middle part, which is the darkness in the heart of the earth. We travel 3 days, symbolically, in the heart of the earth, and we resurrect the Omega. I could do this with just about every myth in the Bible. They're all the same. The book of Ruth is a hero's journey, right? Exodus, Joseph, Moses, all of them are hero's journeys. The story of Christ is a hero's journey. Jesus.
Yeah.
He starts off with baptism. So he's going through the Red Sea. And then he goes into the wilderness. Not a whole lot of, not a big stretch of the imagination. 40 days in the wilderness, right? Not 40 years, but 40 days. And then he goes through the 3 temptations. We all face 3 temptations: lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, pride of life. And so he overcomes the world, but he's not out of the woods yet. In the hero's journey, the clock analogy is it starts at midnight. Then at 3 o'clock, you cross into the underworld, if you will. You traverse down to 6 o'clock, the lowest point. That's when you actually you get the gift of enlightenment, redemption, however you want to look at it. And then the clock goes up to 9 when you cross back over the threshold. And so Jesus was at 6 o'clock when he sent Satana away in the wilderness. His journey from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock was his ministry and his death by crucifixion on the cross. Remember, he said at the Last Supper, he says, "I will not drink the fruit of the vine until I drink it anew in my Father's kingdom." He's on the cross. He's seconds away from death. They give him vinegar, which is fruit of the vine. At that point, he was in the Father's kingdom and then passed. Kind of all easy when you know what to look for.
How about Leviticus? Do it with Leviticus. No.
Oh gosh, please. I am completely ignorant on most of the Old Testament, perfectly honest. It's almost like God said, read this, read this, read that. So I know Job, I love Ruth, I know Joseph, but some of the other books in the Bible, I'm complete ignoramus on. I'll be honest, totally honest.
If you could do the hero's journey with Leviticus, I'd be like,
Yeah.
that's a master class right there.
Let's hear it in numbers.
I don't know. See, here's the thing. So these heroes' journeys, like the book of Ruth, I believe, came out of Sumeria with Abraham, along with a lot of the Psalms and a lot of Proverbs. I think they're ancient, like really ancient. And so most of the heroes' journeys, I believe, were written by people who understood the symbolic language to write it. I don't think the people that came out of Egypt were symbolically literate, to be perfectly honest. If you did read chapters, it's chapter 2. I think in chapter 2 of my book, I talk about I'm sorry, 5 in my book about Genesis 2. I point out that I believe that day 5 of creation was added later. And I also believe day 7 was added later, because they say, God rested. How can God rest? His name is 2 verbs, right? So, and it's all very numerology. There's no symbolism in day 7, but a lot of numerology, which is Canaanite, if you ask me. Day 5, he has the whole creation of day 5. The way it's done is completely wrong from the other days of creation. When God calls forth the living soul from the earth, he said, all that walk and breathe. The people of ancient Israel didn't understand that fish breathed, I don't think, right? But they do. They breathe in the water.
Yeah.
They didn't think that birds that flew in the air actually were considered part of those that walk and breathe. And so we have the fish and the birds being created on day 5, but on day 6, God calls forth the living soul, all the living animals that move and breathe upon the earth. That would include the fishes and the birds. So either God created the fishes and the bird twice, or day 5 is a late addition. My opinion.
Yeah.
You can't prove any of this, right? But it just went.
That's the tough part.
Yeah. I thought something that would pique your interest when I mentioned it was the 4 pillars of the gospel of Christ, none of which are taught in the church today, which is surprising if you think about it. I even went for a number of years to a Presbyterian church. And the Presbyterians are descended from the Calvinists, and the Calvinists definitely believed in predestination. But boy, you can't get them to talk about predestination in the church. They don't touch it. They teach it to the kids in Sunday school, but they don't talk about it from the pulpit because it's very controversial. But Paul was firmly convinced that predestination, our lives are predestined. The Old Testament is clearly a document that supports predestination. Like, they don't even explain it. They just say, oh yeah, predestination, and they move on. And so my proof that Paul thoroughly believed in predestination was, in many of his letters, he argues against the law and he argues against circumcision. And the reason was people would push him back, saying, oh, no, the law is divine. It was given to us by God. How could you say it's not applicable to Christians? And so Paul has these long, lengthy arguments about why the law is no longer valid for Christians with faith. And he does the same with circumcision. But when he mentions predestination, he never argues for it because no one ever argued against him on it. Predestination was a firmly held belief in the first century world. God rules the fates, right?
Yeah.
And so when you understand predestination, there's a lot of things that come out of that. For instance, if you find yourself in life at a point where you're saying, wow, it sure looks like it's raining a lot on me, you're basically arguing against the creation. You're basically saying, maybe God got this part wrong. Maybe he didn't mean this or something, right? And you've got to accept your life with the good, the bad, the ugly. Each of them equally. You have to understand that I'm going through a bad time right now because this is part of the life that God created for me, perfectly created for me. And so I don't like it, but I'm going to try and understand it as best I can without arguing about it.
Yeah.
I guess. Predestination. Then the day of the Lord. I did a podcast with a Lutheran preacher, and that was interesting. A very nice fellow, but he sees the day of the Lord as something that occurs to us after death. We go to heaven, and God judges the good and the bad. And of course, that's never said anywhere in the New Testament. Paul talked about the day of the Lord. He's always talking, go and wait on the Lord. Right? And so a lot of these modern scholars, the secular scholars, say, well, Paul told everybody the Lord was coming back in their lifetime, and he didn't. And so Paul was wrong. Like, you don't even know what you're talking about. The day of the Lord is a spiritual event. Yeah. It's something that happens internal to each man. We all will have a day of the Lord. You can't, that's part of the human journey. That's written into the program. And so you will have a day of the Lord. You will enter the kingdom of the heavens, and you will go through resurrection. That's absolute sacrosanct. That is not going to change for anybody. Now, when it occurs, that's another story, because Jesus said to pray and believe. And what are we supposed to believe in if we're praying and believing? Can we actually hasten the day of the Lord? Can we bring it forward from our deathbed to sometime before we die? And that's the impression I get when Jesus, or when Paul was talking about it. He was saying, lost my train of thought, drat. But the point is that these are things. Oh, that's what it was. The word was, I think, pro elpizo, and what it means is an early expectation of Christ in our life. In other words, that's what Christians have over the other people. Everybody enters the resurrection, the just and the unjust, the righteous and the unrighteous. But what Christians have is an early expectation of the Lord that can be maybe brought about through prayer and believing. So focusing your mind during prayer on bringing forth the day of the Lord, the kingdom of the heavens, into our life. That's what I'm hanging on.
So is it fair to say that becoming a Christian is more like the early access to the resurrection? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. Because, look, I'm happy whenever it happens. One day I'm going to die, and I'm going to enter the resurrection. It would be super cool if the resurrection could begin earlier than that I could experience the spiritual living, the spiritual life that we've been taught. If I could experience it while I'm alive and ambulatory, walking and talking. I'm not telling God what to do. I'm going to pray, right? And I'm going to believe, and we'll see what happens. So if I just go off the radar and you never hear from me again, you'll know what happened.
He's not answering my emails. He probably got resurrected.
He's not interested anymore, right?
He's got other stuff, other important things. So I am curious because, especially early on, you touched on hell briefly, and this verse popped into my brain, and I've been searching for it, and I was like, there it, I found it, and it was it's Matthew 25:41, where they're asking Jesus about the final judgment. And one of the things he says at the back half of verse 41 is the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, so fire is spiritual fire, right? Mm-hmm. I'd have to look at the quote. Let me see if I can find it. You said it was Matthew
25:41. So that full verse is, then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels.
Matthew 25.
So I'm curious by that. On one hand, it's like, okay, so if we take this as a symbolic purification,
yes.
Then in this case, who are the devil and his angels? What's that? Because it feels like a separate group from who he's talking to that this thing existed for.
The devil and his angels are the woman and her children from Genesis 3. These are the manifestations of ego that plague us throughout our lives. Revelation says, from the woman come all of the mental illnesses and demons and all manner of uncleanliness that plague us. They come from our brain. So what's that verse one more time?
Oh, you're good. Matthew 25:41.
25:41. So I'm looking up at it on a Greek interlinear because it's just easier. So then he will say to those on the
What
left,
a casual flex.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
oh, this is the only way I could read it, but it's really kind of beautiful.
I just have an iPhone, so
Oh God, I can't do the iPhones. All right, so depart from me, those being cursed, into the fire. Eternal. Well, it's not eternal. It's aeonian. Aeonian is your life. Aeonian begins when you're born or conceived, and it ends when you die. It means the span of a man's life. And there's this argument's been going on for so long, but that's what it means. That's how it's used in the Greek, and that's how it's used. It should be used in the New Testament. So this fire only occurs while you're alive. All right. So having been prepared for Diablo. So Diabolo, there's Satana and there's Diabolus. Satana is the present sin, the present existing within the woman, the belief system, and the ego. Diabolus is the one in Revelation who accuses the brothers night and day. So when you are sitting around minding your own business, when Dustin's at work staring off into space, he might be thinking of something he did in the past that he's not very proud of, right? Mm-hmm. We do this a lot. We beat the out of ourselves for things that we did in the past. That's Diabolus. That's that aspect of our brain that reminds us what terrible people we are. So that's what the purpose of Diabolus. What it means is dia means through, and bolo means to cast. So the concept in Greek is through slayer or through caster. In other words, I'm slaying your character by casting accusations through you and bringing down your character in front of other people. So that's Diabolus. Satana is the present sin of just existing within our ego and believing it's real. Yeah. So the fire is spiritual fire. It's actually what spiritual fire is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the pain and suffering we go through whenever we try to change our ego or our belief system. So let me give you an example. So every day we change a little bit. Every experience we have changes us, and our belief system has to move to change to that new understanding of ourselves. That causes a light background amount of cognitive dissonance. It's always strange. A good example I like to use is when you move to a new house. Let's say you're living in a nice house, you get a big raise at work, and you buy a new, better house. Even though this house is where you want to be, this house is better house, it's always a little weird driving home from work to this new house. It's always a little weird sleeping in a new bedroom and in this new place. It shouldn't be weird, but it is. And the reason it is because our belief system has to change from the guy who lived in the old house to the guy who's living in the new house. Whenever we go through a major life experience, like a bad one, like we lose a loved one, it's awful. We just go through this awful period where the belief system is changing to this new reality where this person's no longer in our life. After about 6 months, everything's normal again. I'm the guy that doesn't have this person in my life anymore. If you revisit the memories and things like that, it can bring a little bit of sadness, but not like the initial amount of sadness. So moving our belief system from point A to point B brings pain and suffering. Scientists call it cognitive dissonance. Paul and Jesus called it spiritual fire. So the job of a Christian and anyone on a spiritual journey is to take our belief system from where it is now to zero. Because we are not the ego. We are not this person that we think we are. The idea was to sit back as consciousness, like in Genesis chapter 2, Yahweh Elohim as consciousness, and observe the life that we've been given. Have the experience of life, but not to believe we are that life. And that is the mistake we all make. we all enter into the woman. She births the children, and those children are our demons. So the reverse process of getting rid of the children, the devil and his angels, and getting rid of the woman is the process of moving from a belief system that exists to a belief system that no longer exists. So it's really pretty interesting. You know, when I was looking at it, chapter 1, I wrote pretty towards the end of the book because I had learned all these things about the belief system from the New Testament and especially Revelation. So Revelation, you have the beast rising up from the sea. The beast is the woman, and it turns into the woman later on the red dragon. But if you think about it, the beast rising up from the sea of people, so all of us have the beast, has 7 heads and 10 crowns. The 10 crowns represents man. We're all kings of our own little kingdom here, right? Where we think we're the kings. And the 7 heads represents the divinity that exists within the beast, that's us. So we enter into the woman, the program code created for us by the brain, and we are divinity. So we're bringing the divinity into the human form, which we're not supposed to do, but we do. And that's the beast. The false prophet is the ego that arises. The false prophet makes everyone worship the first beast. And those that don't worship and take the mark of the beast are those that are killed. Well, the people that don't worship the beast are the saints. The saints have had the beast thrown into the lake of fire for them. They don't worship the beast. They're not killed in the sense of being killed physically. They're dead to the physical world and alive to Christ. That's that symbolism of that, the beasts of the Revelation.
Yeah, it's interesting how you can carry the same ideas and kind of plug them into these different areas in Scripture.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was saying is connecting dots. Like all of a sudden, all this stuff in Revelation made sense once I started looking at his human ego, belief system, various manifestations of our ego. And then I was able to put it in a scientific term, and that was chapter 1, how our belief system controls how we believe. So as consciousness, we're creating our own reality. That's what's going on. But the problem is that reality is being focused through the prism of our belief system, what I believe. And that's what's controlling the reality around me, is that belief system. Once the saints have removed the belief system, I don't know what happens. I'm not there. I don't have all the answers. I'm just like you. I'm struggling. I'm trying to. I don't know what happens.
We're all working toward it.
Brings up an interesting question about the resurrection, because there is no belief system. There's just consciousness, our consciousness, and 1,000 years with the Lord in perfection. So what is existence like? We're still alive as humans. We still are attached to our body. But do we create any reality we want to live in? Do we, what are the limits? What's going on there? And there's nothing. There's nothing that gives us answers. Jesus said we would be like angels. We would not be given and taken in marriage. And then he says, God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. Revelation says it'll be a new heaven and a new earth in the holy city. And the holy city is perfect and it's light all day long. It means the light of God shines all day long in the holy city. I don't know what that means as far as what our experience will be like when we enter the holy city. So don't ask me about that.
That's part 2, right?
Yeah. You know, there's a, I guess you could call it a flaw in my reasoning or rationale. I have a preconceived notion of how things work from what I've read. So I look at our lives as the hero's journey. Okay, we're all on a hero's journey that ends in the holy city. So I see everything that way. So when I read scripture, this is what's in my mind. This is what I'm looking for, evidence to support that. That could be a flaw in my rationale. That could be a flaw in my reasoning. But if you look at things the way I do with the idea of the hero's journey, and then put that to scripture when you're reading something. Like when I read what Paul, I said earlier in the discussion about God's glory through us.
Hmm.
And it's incredible because there's so much to God compared to this darkness that we're living in, this limited amount of information. It has to be this way, by the way. In order to have experience, you can't know what's coming. Then it wouldn't be an experience. So we're blinded to what's coming. We're blinded to the understanding, and that's how we have experience. A new thing occurs, and a new thing occurs. And so we have this experience, these stepping stones that we're stepping on. It's all part of the journey this perfect journey that God has planned for us. And like I said, it's a plan. It's pretty interesting because every experience we have changes us. Every experience we have leads us to a greater understanding of God and the entire experience that we are having. In other words, everything starts to make sense. When we get towards the end of our lives, I think we look back and we don't understand a lot of the things that have happened to us in life, but then we do. Then it goes, oh, I see. If this hadn't happened, then that wouldn't have happened. Then I wouldn't be here doing this type of things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually happy you said that, especially in the beginning, when it's how our beliefs or our worldviews really do affect how we interpret the things that we experience, the things that we read. And I think that's definitely a flaw that we can all fall for. And I talk about this all the time on the podcast, where it's like, well, like let's read the Bible for what it says or what it is, instead of how we have been told it is. But with that, it's like there still is that problem of, if I have a preconceived notion of what I think it should say, then there is a tendency for us to kind of try to force feed our perspective onto what we're reading.
Exactly. And that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, I have an overall view, but not a specific view. In other words, I know we're on a hero's journey. It's in every culture that's ever come along, and I see it in the Bible everywhere. But what the specific meanings for instance, we just talked about eternal fire. Well, the word eternal is always translated from aeonian, and aeonian never was eternal. It was always instead of saying eternal life, it's life to the age that you're living in. We want life now, not at some future point, right? This is things that have to occur in our age. And that's not a translational error. Just if you look up the word aeonian, then you'll find out that the Greek usage was always about the age of a man. You know, even Plato, Socrates both said that's what it meant. I think in, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think in the Odyssey, no, the Iliad. In the Iliad, I think Heraclitus' wife, when he dies, she comes up and says, no, it's Hector. Oh, Hector, your aeon is over, right? The age of Hector is over now. So, these aren't things that you have to argue about either, and it makes more sense when you read it. I'm not sure why they do eternal. I think eternal is more of a purposeful mistranslation to put forth other ideas. So when the New Testament is written, you have all these symbols that they put in it are there to teach us spiritual concepts. But if a person who is not spiritual is reading it and trying to translate it, they're going to try and translate it into a physical translation. It's like these, it seems like every religious studies professor out there on the internet, they're all atheists, it seems. Maybe not all of them, but most of them are.
There's a lot of them.
Oh my gosh. And every time they talk about the New Testament, it's always in a very physical manner. They don't speak of it in any sort of spiritual term. So Paul's a bad guy because he promised everybody the Lord was coming back, and the Lord didn't come back. Well, that's not true. You don't know that. You don't understand the spiritual significance of what Paul was talking about.
Yeah, it's actually funny, and I think it's kind of a sad thing that happened. I think especially in the early 2000s, where there was this. At this point, it seems not irreparable, but a very strong disconnect between spiritual and like the scientific or the scholarly community. When it's like there really shouldn't be that disconnect.
Well, you know, one of the videos that I put on my channel was how God creates reality from Genesis chapter 1, and I link it to quantum physics. So when you interpret it correctly, translate it correctly, basically, first of all, so God says, "I am light," and he became light. And then immediately it has God dividing between the light and the darkness. So you have to ask yourself, where did the darkness come from? All there is God, and now God is light. So you have to assume that the darkness is a emergent product of the light. But God is not the darkness. That's the weird part. So God creates the physical universe, but he is not the physical universe. The physical universe has the underpinning of God's spirit. But once the physical universe manifests itself, it's no longer God. So the way the quantum physicists describe it is they call it a wave-particle duality. Okay, and so it's not a wave.
With like the slit experiment, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's not a wave, it's not a particle, it's both. Okay, so it's a wave-particle duality, but once an observer observes the collapse of the wave function, it is a particle. No longer a wave, it's a particle. That's what they're talking about. So God, first, he divides, and the words in the Bible are pretty interesting. He divides between the light and between the darkness. So we don't talk like that. That doesn't make any sense. Well, the word between really means to interval. So I created a word in my book, and my editor says, "That's not a word." I said, "Well, it is now, because this is the only way I can describe it." She was great. She loved me. But anyway, so what he's doing, he's intervaling the light, and he's intervaling the darkness. And so you get a picture of this frequency of vibration. Well, how fast is it going? Well, we also know, when we go to day 4, God intervals the light and the darkness of the luminaries shining on the earth through the rotation of the earth. So because he's using the language in day 4, that the same language he's using on day 1, we know that the between and between actually means a frequency of vibration, an oscillation. And this is between the light and the darkness is the same as what the physicists are calling wave-particle duality. This wave-particle duality, the physicists have no idea where it comes from.
Right.
And Genesis does. This is, it's all coming from God.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's cool how we can answer scientific quandaries just by like, well, what did God say?
Right, yeah.
Well, yeah, so the point I make in the video is that quantum physics wasn't first described in 1900 by Max Planck. It was first described 4,000 years ago or longer ago by the Sumerians who wrote Genesis. They perfectly describe the quantum nature of reality in Genesis chapter 1, and they do it in 2 verses. It's absolute genius. Yeah. Absolute genius. It is.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that I find so cool. We've said this before too. Is just like, yeah, every word is so intentional.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, they had time to craft it. So.
Yeah. Well, so here's an interesting one. So in Genesis 1, God's name is Elohim. But there's Elohim that says I am, and there's the Elohim that says I become. All right. So you have the duality expressed in God's creative acts in Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 2, the story is about us. So it switches up. God's name will be expressed in his name. They name him Yahweh Elohim. Yahweh is the singular I am. Elohim is the plural I become. So you go, well, how do you know that? I know that because in Genesis chapter 3, when the serpent, which is symbolic representation of the human brain, and the woman, which is the symbolic representation of the language center of the left side of the brain, and the human self-awareness, belief system, and ego, they're both physical creations. They don't refer to God as Yahweh Elohim. They only refer to him as Elohim, the physical aspect of God's name, which is pretty fascinating. That's only done 2 or 3 times in there. But it's pretty fascinating that those little minutia, the little minutia of detail that they put in there to give us the clue of what the myth actually means, what they're trying to tell us.
I guess from a starting point, and correct me if I'm wrong, is because I don't want to misrepresent what you're saying. So you're kind of taking Scripture as a whole as more of this. What's the word I'm looking for? I guess more of a myth view. It's like this is a more everything is symbolic, and it's not really trying to present anything that is I don't like to use the word, but like historical or reality. That's not its intention at all. It's just trying to present symbolic ideas for us to take and learn from to see our journey through our days. Is that fair to say?
It's pretty close. Let me give you an example. So
yeah, please.
First of all, mythology is an ancient style of communication where stories are written in 2 languages, literal and symbolic. So we are dualistic creatures. We have a literal side, which is our physical side, the language center. We understand things in words and sentences. But there's another side to us, our spiritual side, our consciousness, which understands concepts and symbols. So mythology is communicates to the whole man. It gives you a literal story and it gives you a symbolic story. That's what makes it a myth. That's what makes mythology because it's written in what I call mythological literature. And so you take the story of Abraham. Abraham is a real historical character. At least I believe he is.
Yeah.
He had a real story and it was written in the Bible, but it's also a symbolic story. And the symbolic story goes like this. Sarah and Abraham wanted to have a child, male heir. And Sarah was barren. Okay, so she says, go sleep with the slave, Hagar, and let her bear you a son. He does, and the first man, Ishmael, is born, but he's born into bondage. Does this sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
He's born as a slave into bondage. Then God miraculously brings something that was dead back to life, Sarah's womb. And then Sarah gets pregnant with the second man, which is representative of Christ, the Christ kingdom that comes back to us during resurrection. So here you have a story of a real man in the Bible, but it's also a myth because it's written with the symbolism of our human journey. The first man we're born is Adam, and the last man will be Christ. And this is true for almost Exodus is a symbolic myth, but it's a true story. I believe it happened. Joseph, I believe Joseph's stories, but Joseph is a classic hero's journey, right? Yeah. So that's what a myth is. It can be about real or unreal characters, but it's also written in a symbolic story. The symbolic story will always be the spiritual story because it's relating to our spiritual side, our symbolic side.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is because for me, because what I do appreciate, what I do like, is you kind of exposing this layer to Scripture, because I think it's easy for us to take, at least for me and my background, which as listeners should know, I came from a very Reformed background, and I've moved into I feel like I'm in this in between space because I go to an Assembly of God church right now, a more charismatic church. And I laugh because it's like I feel like I'm too Reformed for the charismatics, but I'm too charismatic for the Reformed. So I'm like I'm just stuck here. But I think that's one thing that we can often do is get stuck in this is what it means and that's it, and then boom, we're done. But what I do appreciate is you kind of exposing like, no, there's another layer that's going on here. it can mean more than one thing, and I think that's important for us to look at. I think where the difference that I would have with you is when I see it, it's like, yeah, I do think those layers exist, but they point to the lordship of Jesus, as opposed to telling a story about our journey.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I was afraid you'd ask. So I'm like, let me think if I could see if I can find an example. So the one that comes to my mind first is kind of like this cosmic code, if you will. I'll put it in parentheses or
That's
in quotations.
Good. No.
Which is when we look at like the names from Adam leading to Noah, and I'll see if I can remember this well. Where it's like when we look at what do their names mean, it's easy just to read the genealogy, be like, cool, a bunch of dead guys, a bunch of old people. But when we look at like, okay, well, what do their names mean? Because that's important. It tells the story of let me see. I can just find. I've got to.
I think I know what you're referring to. I've seen that somewhere. I can't tell you what it is, but the names lead to. There's symbolism with the names and the chronology in which they're laid out. That's what you're trying to say, right?
Talking about man. I'm going to throw my own language into this.
That's fine.
It's kind of like man falling into sin or finding corruption, and then God sending himself down to redeem man.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the story. That's the story, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess for me, when I see it pointing at, it's like, well, okay, so it's about the guy being sent down.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well,
does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it does make sense. And so here's when you start Genesis chapter 2, verse 4 is where the real beginning of chapter 2 is. And it says, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth in the day that Yahweh Elohim made earth heaven. Wait a minute. Why we swap those two around? What's going on? Symbolic language again, right? When you dig into it and you read through it and you try and understand it, what that means is that each of us are created as separate earth heavens, separate little reality bubbles within the larger reality bubble of the heavens and the earth. So each of us have our own universe. It begins when we're conceived and it ends when we die. And so these universes are unique from everybody else's, obviously, because we perceive and we see things. The journey through the Bible, I see it as a journey. I'm a heretic, so I see it as a journey for each of us. The story is about us. The Genesis 2 isn't about how Jesus operates, it's about how we operate. Genesis 3 is about how we operate. I don't put as much emphasis on Jesus as most of the modern church does. Mm-hmm. I look at Jesus and Paul as being two sides of the same coin. One was spiritually there to bring us the information, and one brought us the information from a more physical reality. Without Paul, we wouldn't have a Christian faith. I mean, Paul really was instrumental, and so was Jesus. But I see those as the twin pillars of Christianity, equal in the application of our faith. I see Jesus as a man who lived his life and died and entered his resurrection. I don't see him as God. We're all sons of God. Paul tells us that. So obviously Jesus was one of us and he was a son of God. I think they put too much emphasis on the divinity of Jesus without understanding that this journey really is about us. It's our journey. Jesus knew that. He came down to show us what he went to the other side and came back, loved us enough to come back and say, look, this is how you do this. The whole Christian teaching is about going through and having this journey for ourselves and how to conduct ourselves on the journey and through the journey till we all enter together as brothers into the holy city in the resurrection. That's how I read it. Am I right? I don't know. It's just, I could be wrong. I'm never going to say that, but that's how I read it. And it's hard for me to understand it any other way. Like for instance, in the in the book of Acts, they say that, when Jesus, on the 40th day, he rose up into heaven, right, in the clouds. That's not what the book says. What it says is that he went back in to heaven, the heaven within us. Paul said that the Lord appeared to him and taught him the gospel from beginning to end. So you got to ask yourself, did Jesus re-resurrect after the fact? Because this all happened after the 40 days. So did he re-resurrect after the fact? Or did the Lord come to Paul in a spiritual way and teach him in a spiritual way? That's what I think happened after the crucifixion. The Lord appeared to the apostles and the brothers at the time from within. That's just my interpretation.
Yeah.
Just how I read it. So it makes more sense to me that way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I appreciate you being willing to share and kind of outline where your thoughts and how you read scripture. I'm always so sad because it's like I feel like sometimes it takes like an hour and a half just to outline a thought,
just to get into it.
And now it's like, okay, now we're here. It's like, oh no, it's been I feel like we need like another 3 hours just to flesh these out.
Yeah.
That's always just the bane of podcasting for me and just conversation.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing is, like I said, we could spend a whole hour just talking about Genesis chapter 1 and still not cover everything in it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're just hopscotching around the Bible and talking about different things. I'm trying to show the connections that are there, the connected dots. It's so important because the Bible can't be understood just by reading the Gospel of Mark or reading Revelation or reading some books of the Old Testament. It's kind of got to be taken in as a whole. And that's kind of what my book is trying to do. It's taking the essential Old Testament, the essential New Testament. I mean, I only go through the Gospel of Mark. I don't even mess with the other Gospels. And I only go, Mark's a great gospel. It is the fundamental gospel. It's like, it's bare
bones.
It's like bare knuckle. Yeah, exactly. It's like this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. I got to go. Right?
I gotta go.
I got things to do.
It's the elevator pitch of the gospel.
It is. But it's so great because it's very inspired. I'm always looking for the words that are used wrong in the New Testament. And I don't mean the English translation, I mean the Greek. Like when they put things in Greek and there's certain things that are consistent that couldn't have happened by accident. Like it's always the faith of God that you have. Jesus said, have the faith of God, right? And so Paul goes, he says, have the faith of Christ. So it's not our faith. And so as long as I see them saying the faith of God or the faith of Christ, I know it was copied correctly. If someone had miscopied that, it would say something else and it wouldn't make any sense. But you look through it, it's always the faith of God or the faith of Christ, meaning it's not our faith. And the other thing that Revelation points out that I think is pretty cool is that none of this journey is us. It's about us and it's for us, but we're not doing it. God is controlling the entire thing. In Revelation, the symbolism of the dragon traipsing through heaven is the symbolism of the physical dominating, the physical being the ego, the belief system that lives in our brain and us being in it. But Revelation kind of turns around and shows it as the physical dominating the spiritual by the dragon traipsing through heaven. And then they say the dragon was thrown out of heaven by Michael and his angels. In other words, it's being done for us. Now, people don't like to hear about that. They want to think they're doing it. Oh, I went to church and I prayed and I did this and I did that. That's who we are. We're all like this. But it's being done for us. And so this whole journey that all of us are on is very predestined, very premeditated by God. And so when those days, those significant spiritual events happen to us, they're not accidents. They're all purposes. Tomorrow you could wake up, drive your car and have a massive spiritual experience in the vision of God. And it's been planned from the beginning of the world. this spiritual experience you're going to have. And we have many of them in life. That's what keeps us going, right? Anyway.
Well, unfortunately, we got
it's late.
It's late.
Yeah, I can talk, I guess.
No, I love it.
I am Irish.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I've got that running through me. I kissed the Blarney Stone, so that the gift of gab is upon me.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, you'll get to cut out a lot of stuff when the microphone wasn't working, so maybe it actually was only an hour.
I've got no problem with it being longer.
I'm so tense right now. I know it's going to go out. Out.
Please don't go out. Well, yeah, thank you again. It's funny, and this is what I love is even at the end of it, even there wasn't like a ton where we had a chance to go back and forth too much. Because I really wanted to give you some space to outline and kind of follow your train of thought here for us to listen to, because we talk about the other side about it all the time.
Yeah.
You know, it must be nice. That's one of the things I don't really have. Like my wife and I talk about this stuff, but I don't go to church anymore, obviously. You know, once you get to a certain point in your journey, you realize that, you know, if you're going to church and they're irritating you through their lack of understanding, right?
You're just sitting there with clenched fists.
I used to take notes. Oh, yeah, about, you know. And I remember, I won't go into it. But anyway, the point is that my wife and I talk about these things, but there's no group or people that I talk about with it. You know, I could talk with some of my kids about it. So I really enjoy these podcasts for that reason. And here's two guys that are really interested in this and like to talk about it. It's like, this is fantastic. I love it. There's other people like me.
You're part of the Tipsy verse now, so
That's right.
Cool, the Tipsy verse.
I think what we'll have to end up doing, because I really would enjoy having more time to talk with you now that I feel like we're kind of like, all right, we see where we're at. At least I understand more where you're coming from.
Yeah.
It's like I feel like we need to do like a proper sit down. Let's talk in real life sometime too. I think that could be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Give me a reason to go to Florida.
There you go.
I love it.
There you go. Maybe Steven can be a part of that when this.
That'd be great. We could have some black coffee as well.
Or I could have a ceremonial glass of wine. Like just maybe take a sip or two, pretend I'm drinking it, no problem. Like I said, I like alcohol. It just doesn't like me.
Maybe some Passover Manischewitz wine.
Let's
for the
not get crazy
for the
here.
symbology.
No. Okay, for the symbology.
Well, yeah, thank you again. I really appreciate your time and your willingness to come on and share your thoughts and ideas. And I appreciate you being a good sport with some of my little but what about that?
I don't mind a bit. No, it's good to challenge each other, because then we go, well, wait a minute, maybe I don't have this worked out the way I think I do. No, that's fantastic. And if maybe we can do this again, and you'll probably have a whole list of questions next time that you'll be, wait a minute, you said this. This is what I got to say about that.
I just have the ammunition now.
Yeah, right.
I got a whole notebook of everything written down already.
Yeah. You said this right here. I got it on video.
I have it written down. It just says heretic here. I don't know if
That's me. Guilty.
Oh man, that's beautiful.
But yeah, no, I that's one thing that I love. Again, is just I love the idea of people sitting down and just having a conversation.
Yeah.
Especially going into it knowing it's like, yeah, we don't agree and we probably won't agree at the end of it. But the point is, it's a working out of our faith and our ideas, and it's like, let's do this together and show that we can do it without burning each other.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like we said at the beginning, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
I mean, it's just a safe space to coexist, really.
Yeah, and the thing is there is a truth, and we do work towards it. Once we see something that we believed that we no longer believe because of whatever, you work towards that truth, and that's really part of the journey, right?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you having me on, and like I said, I'd love to do it again. This is great.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love that as well.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Dustin's shaking his head. No, I don't know.
Freudian slip. No, not again.
No.
Not at 5 o'clock.
It's the lag on my camera. That's what.
That's great. But yeah, thank you again. We'll definitely be talking more.
All right, sounds great, guys. Good talking to you. You guys have a great day. All right.
You too,
You as
man.
well.
Be blessed.
All right.
Talk to you
God
soon.
bless.
God bless you.
Bye.